everyone, my name is Beth Devine. I am with the Wappingers Historical Society. We're here at Mizzier Homestead, and we're lucky enough to talk to Chris Contelmo today, who is a lifetime resident of the village and a longtime member of the Historical Society. So today we're going to talk about what life was like on West Main Street, on the other side of the bridge. So Chris, I know we've talked a lot about East Main Street, but let's hear some stories about West Main Street. I know that wasn't where you lived.
That's far, it was foreign land to me.
Far.
The only time I went up West Main Street was to go to church. So every Sunday we'd walk up to church up West Main Street, and we'd always have an extra nickel so we could stop in Dominic Napoleon's store, which is now, it's across the street from where the tattoo parlor is. That was a little general store. It was up until just recently, fairly, they turned it into an apartment. But we could go in there and we'd buy like school supplies if we didn't have, we needed them for our religion class. And we'd get our nickel for our candy after mass, We'd get one nickel for the basket and one for that. But West Main Street,
what candy did you buy back then?
I can't remember. I always like spiced gumdrops. Maybe I bought them, I don't know. But you got a lot for a nickel. And you could buy candy. I mean, there were so many, like in the 5 and 10 cent stores. And in like the little grocery stores, like I mentioned, there was a little grocery store in our neighborhood down South Avenue, Louise's store. You could go in there and have 2 of those and 1 of those.
And it came in like in little, they put it in a little paper bag, right?
They gave you a little paper bag, and she would pick them up with little tongs and drop them in. Yeah. So anyway, we'd stop there. But West Main Street, if you start on the bottom of the hill, that brown building on the bottom of the hill, I think your Historical Society says that originally was a sweet ore. I think that's what they told me. I don't know. But,
are you talking about the one that has the beautiful flowers?
Yes, yeah.
That was Edgar Popper's store.
Oh, when I was around.
Yes. Prior to that,
yeah.
I don't know.
I think they said that might have been the original factory. I'm not sure, but I think somebody in the Historical Society mentioned that one time. But when you passed there, in my day, it was the way it is now, where the florist shop is. It was Men Canary's Italian store, and then it was a vacant spot. But back when Nick was young, there was a bar where Man Canary's is. It was called Ma Voyeurs. And he remembers going in there when his father after work, and they'd get him a soda pop or something. So,
when you said there was an empty spot, is that because a building had collapsed there?
Something, yeah. There was an ice cream store there, and he always told me he told me the name of the people. He said he always says the lady had a big goiter. And I can't recall the name he called her, but he would go there for ice cream. So that's on the right side of the street. And then as you went up, there was the Mount Carmel Hall. Now that was not a 3-story building. I don't recall it. I always recall it being just a 1-story storefront windows, but inside it was just a great big room. And that's where all the families, Italian families, had their weddings and so forth. I've told you that. And showers for girls and big 16-year-old birthday celebrations and ththings like that in there. Was Our Lady.
And that's not there anymore.
That I think burned down. I think that was a fire, and it wasn't that long ago either that it burned. It was empty, it was vacant for many, many years. It was almost tumbling down.
And that kind of hung over the river, the creek.
Well, the foundations are built from the creek up, I think. They're very high foundations. You can see windows of the foundations if you come on this side and look across. So they built the foundations. They probably at the time built them to bedrock and then built up, I don't know. And then next to that was a long building. And I don't recall whether that was a 3-story building too, but that was Sienna's department store. And that's where everybody shopped, mostly for men's work clothes. Mm-hmm. And they would have, warm winter jackets and heavy jeans and work boots. And I think, as I said, I think she carried Boy Scout uniforms too, if I remember going there with my mother to get my brothers.
A little competition to Sweet Ore?
Well, I don't know. No, she probably sold some Sweet Ore stuff. I can't recall, I remember my mother going in there and buying things for my brother. And then the rest of the way up the hill, I don't recall, but my husband told me, he told me in the order they were, and I got to see if I wrote it down. I think he said on the other side. Oh, I know, there was 2 one was a tailor shop, and one was a house, but it was a funeral home. It was the original Torson Funeral Home, which is a big funeral home in Highland and Poughkeepsie.
Right.
That was there. And then there was another house, I think. And then there was where the little brick shoemaker building is.
The cobbler shop,
Yeah.
yes.
And then from there up, there were just those houses with the double porches. And then where the next corner, which is the corner of School Street and West Main Street, that was the original Knights of Columbus was on that corner. And my great-grandfather and his family lived in a house connected to that. And in 1913, his wife died in childbirth. And he had 4 children. He had 3 girls and a boy. And the oldest girl was probably 14, and the little boy was about 5 years old, 4 years old. And at that time, those girls all went to St. Mary's School. And at that time, if a man alone could not raise children if he didn't have a woman in the house. So social services came to my great-grandfather and said, "We're taking your children and putting them in a home." And he said, "No." He said, "I will go back to Italy with my children. I will not let you do that." So he packed up his children and he took them back to Italy. So my grandmother had just been recently married and she was expecting her first baby. She was his oldest daughter. So I have a picture of the whole family just before they departed. And my grandmother was in the picture expecting her first son, and he was born in 1913. And so my great-grandmother is buried up at St. Mary's Cemetery. She had died in childbirth. But I know of 2 families in Wappingers who, Italian families. One was the Mucci family. The mother died, and they came and put the children in homes. Because my best friend was Eleanor, and she lived, she was in an orphanage in Peekskill, her and her 2 brothers, until the father came back to the United States with a new wife. And then he took the children.
Wow.
And I think the Coronas possibly too that happened with, I'm not sure. But that was what social services was like then, early years. They didn't trust a man to raise children alone in the house. Now today, it's acceptable. Anyway, we could continue up West Main Street, because
you have across the street, the Bain building.
well, we could even go up higher.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
They were all houses until you came to where Rosemary Flower Shop was, where Tony now has the antique store.
Yes.
That was Jones Florist. And then he had greenhouses all next to him, next to the building. And
Jones?
Jones,
Okay.
right. Burton, I know Burton Jones. And then when you went on, there were houses. And then the Contelmo family owned, let's see, I couldn't count the houses. 1, 2, 3, 4. Maybe around the 5th house. They owned that 5th house. And they owned from that house up to Thornton's service station.
Oh, yes.
And on that property, he had barns. And Nick's grandfather had barns. And he came from a family that did traveling and transporting, because that's what his grandfather did in Italy. And so he had a hauling company, horse-drawn carts and a hauling company. And they bought it piece by piece as they got the money, and so that's where he was. And then across the street from him, which then he bought that house too, that belonged to Tibbs, who had the newsstand down in the village. You know the little brick building on Market Street that kind of overlooks the pipeline? Oh, it's next to the winery, the little brick building.
Yes.
That was Tibbs' newsstand when I was young.
Okay.
We would go in there to buy the paper. You buy all the New York papers. You could buy the newspaper and get chewing gum or whatever.
More candy.
More candy. So anyway, that was West Main Street up to Thornton's gas station. And then after that, that was empty. And funny, in the 1800s, one of the priests at St. Mary's Church was a biking enthusiast. And that space from Thornton's gas station up to the Rural Cemetery, he had this built. It was a circular bicycle racing track made of wood. As his name was Father, I think it was Murray or Murphy. And he was one of the first priests at St. Mary's Church in Wappingers. It was the late 1800s. And every Sunday afternoon they had bicycle races on that track.
Wow, I didn't know anything about that. That's fascinating.
That's when Wappingers Bicycle Club was probably first formed.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so then now we could go down West Main on the other side. So if you go start down West Main from Delaverne Avenue, we own property on Delaverne Avenue, which was part of a farm. So originally going way back to the late 1700s, early 1800s, it probably was a big farmhouse on the corner. And then our little house was a tenant farmer's house. Our house is over
On De Laverne.
Yeah, our house is over 200 years old. And it's been changed till you don't recognize it as that. So, but anyway, as you continue down West Main Street, from De La Verne going down, there were mostly just houses, all along the street, houses. And then until you got to the corner across from Rosemary Flower Shop, or the antique store, that was the Great Northern Hotel, I think it was called.
Okay.
And that hotel remained there, but it was vacant. When my husband was a little boy, it was vacant. It wasn't occupied. It was just a big vacant.
Didn't they
building.
have the porches off the second floor? Those.
No, that hotel was the one at the foot of the Main
Yes,
Street Hill when we
okay.
get down there. That was, I
Okay.
think, a different hotel. Yeah, no, I don't recall that they did. You had a picture of it somewhere.
Okay.
Tony has a picture of it in the antique store. I saw it. I can't remember if it had double porches. But that was there. And then you went down, and then there was the church property, of course, and then houses and houses and houses, till you got to Bill Napoleon's store, which was across the street from where the tattoo parlor is. That's where I stopped to get my nickel candy. I talked about that in my last session. But that was a big store for local women to shop for whatever you needed in an emergency, you know, and so forth. Then you went down a couple more houses, and then you came to Tony's Butcher Market. There were 3 butchers in Wappingers. There was Von Borstel's, I talked about that on Mill Street, Mill Street. And there was Kelly's, which was on Market Street, and then there was Tony's up there, was Tony DiGian Domenico, and that was his butcher market. And then you continued down houses, till you got to where the groundhog was now.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a plumbing supply place, but it mostly was a house, but it had storefront windows, so it had to have been something before I can recall it being a plumbing place. And then you went down that hill again. I think one gentleman had a tailor shop in his house. And then there's that funny stone building that's built there, that flat top stone. That was a factory. When that man built that, it was in the 50s, late 50s, and that was a dress factory. A lot of the women worked in there. Mr. Cuccia built that. It was a dress
A
factory.
lot of factories in the village.
Oh, yeah. And then you can continue down from there until you come to all the little apartments. They had storefronts. One was a beauty parlor, and then there was Oliver's Italian restaurant. And then, of course, there was the beauty parlor in the low building, which now is like a bridal shop, I think. And then you continued down the hill till you came to the theater, which was originally the Academy Music Hall, and then it became the theater. I remember Mr. Eisenberg, when he was the manager, his wife was our Girl Scout leader, and I think he was the first one. It had a big movie theater before he bought it, but it was showed old time, my mother remembers going there as a child for movies.
Didn't you tell me that it was totally reversed from what it is now,
Right.
the stage
Yeah.
or the screen?
Right. When it was the Academy of Music, it was a level floor. Now when you walk in, you go uphill. When it was Academy of Music, it was a level floor. That must have burned down or something because, well, no, I know. I remember on the front of the picture of that, you can see the picture. It's 5 or 6 steps up to get in, from the street level.
Mhm.
So it was leveled up to the hill then. So they had basketball games on Friday nights followed by dances, and that's where my mother-in-law met my father-in-law. They came from Highland, crossed a ferry across the river, got a trolley up to Main Street, got the trolley to Wappingers Falls to go to the Friday night dance in Wappingers Falls in
Wow,
1925.
that's quite a trip to go to
1925. And that's where she met my husband, her husband. It was my husband's father. And they were married in 1925, so she probably came down on the trolley in 1924 to go to the dance. Yeah.
So they had basketball games.
On Friday nights.
Were they high school basketball games
These
or
little
just
teams,
pickup
games, or these little teams.
communities?
Community teams, firehouse teams or something like that maybe. And then next to that, there was a boarding house, which that's the place that burned down. There was a floor shop
right in
there.
between.
Yeah, later years was a florist shop. But at the, where the florist shop was Delahanty's grocery store. But they mostly specialized in delivering groceries when I was in the early 50s, when I recall them. It didn't seem to me, you could go in and grocery shop, but their big thing was deliveries. Because most of the older people, my mother-in-law never walked out to a store. Everything was delivered.
Really?
Oh, everything was delivered. Yeah, she was funny that way.
So you would pick up the phone and call
yeah.
your 3-digit phone number?
Or either that or you let your husband stop and give him a list, I guess. I don't know. But she had, there was Krug's Krug's bread truck went around the village. She bought all her cookies and bread and everything from them.
Okay.
Then was an Italian bakery went around the village. But I didn't remember one on the other side to tell you. On East Main Street was Marie's Bakery, but I didn't do the other side of the street, did I?
I mean, would they just ring a bell and people would come out to?
I think
to
they
get
had a schedule that they kind of, you knew Friday afternoon the fish man was gonna come.
Okay.
And like, maybe every Monday and Wednesday, the produce man would come. And then maybe once every 2 or 3 weeks, the tea company man would come.
Now, this was when your mom was growing up, and when Nick's family was growing up.
Right. It'd say, let's say from like the late 20s up to maybe the 1950s, for 20 years in there probably. There was a lot of local deliveries of food, yeah, there was.
And probably that's where all the gossip got spread.
Oh, you kidding, of course. And I spoke to you before, I said there was even a man used to come up on the train, he had 2 big suitcases, he had all kinds of nice clothing items, and he'd show them to you and ask you your size, and next time he came, he'd bring it to you. This was in the 1930s and 40s, yeah. Yeah, up to the 50s, that guy used to go around selling clothes.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Like the Fuller Brush man.
So it was a real small town atmosphere in Wappingers, you know. So we got down West Main Street, so now I could do the other side of East Main Street, but that was another story.
Well, that is another story. We have still lots of topics to talk to you about.
Okay, all right. Yeah.
And we'll do that another time, but thank
One
you so
thing-
much. Oh, go ahead.
One thing I said on the other tape another time was about West Main Street was that most of the women worked in the whole village, worked in the bleachery. But my recollection as a little girl was the ladies coming down West Main Street going, because there were the stairs down to the factory.
Yes.
And the recollection of them all walking down West Main Street in their cotton house dresses with their aprons and their white socks and their saddle shoes. Walk down the hill, go down the stairs to the factories, you know. So that was my recollection of West Main Street.
Well, everybody must have been in pretty good shape,
You better-
walking that hill and going down those steps,
stairs.
and then coming back.
Right. When we were young, and even when we were teenagers, we'd go walk down the stairs, and you get halfway down, there's a little bench, you could sit there and rest. Then we get to the bottom, we have to come back, because they wouldn't let us out. Because, you know, we'd get caught running around or something.
I did hear that they were trying to restore those steps
Really?
at one
Yeah,
time,
yeah.
not too long ago, that was one of the
I
things.
was always
they wanted.
curious to go see if they still look the same, I was wondering.
That's
didn't
at the
do it
bottom
very
of Gibbons
well.
Avenue.
Yeah, right, exactly. Gibbons Avenue, not in my day, but in my day, I didn't go further, after Delahanty's store, there was another little store, and then there was a hotel. In my age, it was called Chico's, it was a bar, and it belonged to Chico Andretta. But that was the original hotel that had the 2-deckers porch that you recall seeing in all the parade pictures at the bottom of the hill. Yeah, and it had a name, I can't remember, we said it the other day, but I can't remember the name, I think it was called, remember when I told you about the trolley tracks ended there?
Yes.
And they had a big celebration, they went to that hotel, yeah.
So after what's now Community Services, what was that building? Wasn't that an
was
opera
original
house?
opera house. My mother always referred to it as the opera house. But I think that the performing part of it was upstairs on the 2nd floor, I think. I've never, you know.
I did hear that,
yeah.
2nd or 3rd floor.
My mother used to call it the opera house and said that it was a performing center. Yeah, she did say that, yeah.
And go ahead.
But she never mentioned going there to shows, so I don't know that it was even in operation when she was young. My mother was born in 1915, but I don't recall her mentioning it but she always referred to it as the opera house. Yeah.
And then below that really were just homes before you got to the steps.
They were people working in the factory.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know what I mentioned about black people living in the village. There was a lovely family that lived right down there, across from there. It was the Rose White family.
Oh, yes.
And my mother's best friend was Charlotte Rose White, and she always used to go down there to visit with her.
They were very involved in the Zion Church.
Oh, yeah, my mother always, and he was a chauffeur.
Okay.
He drove for the Bogle family and the Burke family, the ones that were head of the family.
Yes.
And when my sister-in-law was going to get married, because my sister-in-law lived for a while, her family they owned the Academy of Music, and they own the building now that Community Services owns with all those apartments.
Mm-hmm.
They owned that, and so she lived next to the theater. So Mr. Rosewhite, oh God, what was his name? Oh, I know his name too. He had two first names they used to call him. I can't remember. Pete Anthony. Pete Anthony. So Pete Anthony used to see Charlotte out walking her baby carriage, and he'd always say to her, "Someday, Miss Charlotte, when you get married, I'm going to drive to your wedding." And do you know, when she got married in 1955, Pete Anthony came with a limousine and drove her to her wedding.
Oh,
Yeah.
wonderful story,
Yeah.
wonderful
Yeah.
story.
That's
All right,
right.
Chris, this is great. I
Yeah.
think we'll come back another day because I still have lots of things that I want to talk to you about.
I better go home.
But thank you so much.
Oh, my Aunt Edith is happy.